Hi, good morning, Danny. How are you?
Morning, Joel. Lucky yourself.
Good, thank you. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I've got Danny Myberg from Cyanra, the leading experts on everything cyber, especially things that are from, unfortunately, attacks on our privacy and on the well-being of our systems, our finances, and our businesses. And Danny is an absolute expert. I've worked with him for many years, and I'm sure you'll find this very interesting. Over to you, Danny.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for having us. Yes, as Charlotte said, my background very quickly. I started off in law enforcement. I started the cyber unit of the South African Police Service. And now we are 17 years that we're doing digital forensics for organizations, companies, and government privately. So focusing on digital forensic investigations, incident response, which is taken off really, really bad in the past couple of months on all the hacking and those type of things. So we see the dark side of the internet and the activities.
So maybe, Danny, just to give everyone an idea of how severe the problem is, hence the title of today's talk, and that is, it's a pandemic waiting in the wings, a ransomware, and how this is playing out in South Africa. I know that South Africa is ranked as the third most vulnerable country in the world and the most prevalent country when it comes to ransomware attacks. And I think most people are aware of the problem, but they're not quite aware of how significant it is. Maybe you can give some insights from your own practical experience, especially even over the last couple of months, as you've explained to me previously.
Yeah. So what we see is, South Africa is definitely one of the most attacked countries out there. As you've mentioned, some of the stats shows that we're the third most attacked country worldwide. The type of attacks that we're seeing is basically clustered into three major areas. Number one is what we refer to as a business email compromise. That's where a company's environment is compromised, or the email account is compromised of a user, and the hackers read through the email and basically then intercepts the communication between the client and their financial institution. They change the banking detail, the money goes into a wrong account. The US Secret Service actually identified that is the biggest fraud going on currently, and we're losing in excess of $300 million per month globally in terms of this crime. Not that was stolen, but that they actually got away with the money. So really big. We're seeing in South Africa, we're doing between 4 and 6 cases per week. Secondly, we've got the hacking. Hackers on the environment. Statistics are showing in South Africa that a hacker is in an environment for more than 209 days before his presence is actually realized. For the hacking, basically what the aim is to utilize that environment and steal data. But now, as you said, the third thing that's really become prominent and keeping a lot of people awake at night is the ransomware attacks. Typically what we saw with the Transnet attack. So what we've seen in the last 6 months, more or less, is that the criminals are doing a combination attack. Number one, they come in, they do a reconnaissance of the environment, and then they steal the data. After they've stolen the data, they encrypt the environment as well. So now if you've got backups, they come back to you and say, well, luckily you were able to recover your environment, but bad news for you, we've also got your client data. So then they extort you both for encrypting your data as well as for not distributing your client information. So it's really becoming very, very problematic for us, and we're seeing a huge uptrend in the number of attacks that we see.
And Danny, as I understand it, what they also do is they leave residue malware on your system, often that they can then access at a later stage, even though you think that the problem's solved. You might have paid a ransom to these cyber criminals, and at the later stage, they can then regain access and start all over again with you.
What we're seeing is that, if something goes wrong on your environment, typically your organization will phone their IT service provider. A lot of times that is actually the wrong thing to do, because it's because of that IT service provider that there was a breach in your environment. Maybe they didn't update your firewall or whatever. Then we're sitting with the situation of, is that IT service provider really going to tell you that they were the cause of the breach? Number two, the typical IT guys in the environment does not get hacked on a daily basis. It's maybe once a year or once a 2 year. They're not an expert on this field. So their main concern is just get the systems up and running so that the client, stops screaming at them. They fix the problem. They don't go through the process of actually establishing, if the hackers came into that environment 6 months ago, what's all the actions that they did? One of the first things a hacker wants to do is to create continuity for himself to gain access to that environment. So we see on average that they compromise 5, 6. They'll get in with one account. They'll compromise when they're inside. They capture all your passwords, take it outside, decrypt the password file, break the passwords, and come back. Then they've got access to 10 user accounts. What they then do is they only use 1 or 2 of those attacks of those accounts during the attack. So you don't know about the other files that they've got open or the other accounts that they've got, and they can log on with any one of those afterwards. We also see that they establish backdoors where they can come in later. They set up things like utilizing Dropbox. So they set a Dropbox up on your server, unbeknown to you, and that Dropbox keeps on synchronizing out to the Dropbox that they own on the internet. And that's how they keep on actually maintaining this foothold in your environment.
And Danny, maybe if you could explain to us, in simple terms, how something like this would typically go down. If you were to run through it in terms of how a cyber criminal would make contact with you, and also set the terms of what ransom's being demanded. So a typical situation where it's basically akin to kidnapping. And how it would typically play out.
Okay. So roughly speaking, there's many attack methods that they follow, but we see that a lot of the attacks are taking place through a phishing exercise, a brute force attack, known vulnerabilities on the environment. They gain access to the environment, and typically we see on average that we've got a window of about 3 months where the hacker is in the environment. In that period, they do a lot of things. They do your password cracking, they collect the information on one central server, they encrypt that data and then get it out of your environment, typically anything from 25 megabytes to 5 terabytes of data going out. Then they leave behind the ransom note. So the ransom note, if they've taken out data, they will, when they're ready and they've succeeded in taking your data, they will execute the ransomware. They typically go for your servers, they go for your domain controllers, and they want to destroy your backups. So if you don't have backups that's totally air-gapped and totally offline, they will format your backups as part of this process. Or what they do is also, over a 28-day period, they will encrypt your backups, or not encrypt your backups, but infect your backups. So if you restore backup, immediately it starts encrypting again. So now they do the encryption. After the encryption is run, they basically go and publish this ransom note. Ransom note will tell you they've become ridiculous. Some of the highest ones that we've seen went up to about 90 million rand in terms of ransom. So now you're sitting with this ransomware, your IT guys has come to you and said, listen, our backups is also useless, or the backup is not working, we can't utilize it. Then you're sitting with a dilemma to say, now how are we going to pay? So typically that's where we get involved, is if you realize that you are compromised, we move in and we assist the client with an incident response process. So we help them with containing the environment, eradicating the hacker from the environment. repairing, rebuilding the environment, restoring their backups. We collect all the artifacts that's needed for deep dive forensic investigation, because with the information regulator now, there's a lot of things that we need to report. Then we also get involved in terms of the ransom negotiations. So I handle the negotiations. We've been very successful in terms of, on average, we can get it down between 50 and 38%, more or less. Where I've heard internationally, the average is about between 10 and 13%. Maybe they feel sorry for us because we're in South Africa, but we've been very successful with it. We also assist the client, because now you have to pay in cryptocurrency. Then where do you buy crypto? So what we do is we basically assist the client in buying that cryptocurrency. I handle the notification, because we need to comply with international regulation. We can't just pay criminals. So there's a whole process to follow. We assist the client with that payment process, and then we get the backups. So the decryption keys, or we get assurances of not disclosing the data, etc. So far we've been very successful in 100% of the cases we've been involved in, which range about 15 to 20 cases in the past 2 years. None of our clients' data has been published, as well as we got the decryption keys. But when you do the decryption, you have to be very careful how you do it. You can't just say, okay, now we unplug it and go for it, because that ransomware is still inside that encrypted data. So we've got a very specific process that we follow in decrypting it. So that is more or less the situation, but there's a lot of regulatory and legal aspects that now comes into play with POPI that's in act. And we've seen in the past 2 months that where we were able to quickly address this, it is becoming a legal, I don't want to say a legal nightmare, but it's always a legal nightmare in terms of all the regulations that we need to comply with in terms of reporting it and disclosing, etc.
Well, I think that one of the biggest challenges here, apart from numerous pieces of legislation locally and internationally, is a jurisdictional problem. Because as I understand it, most of these attacks are coming from other countries. A lot of them originate out of the Eastern Bloc. Am I correct in saying that, Danny?
100%. So what we've seen in the last hack that we just finished up assisting the client, the hackers basically, after they gained access, the attack came from about 6-7 different countries. And after they gained access, they utilized about 125 different IP addresses globally to constantly access the information. To get the information out quicker, they basically split it up into 100 different locations, and they broke the data up in 100 pieces and send it out. So yes, the attacks are coming internationally. We're also seeing that the majority of the attacks is coming from the East Bloc countries. Then up in Africa, West Africa, East Africa, also very, very prominent. South Africa, we've got a very active hacking community down in Cape Town, actually a syndicate that operated from there. But the majority of the attacks that you read about in the news are coming from East Bloc countries, China, Russia, those areas.
And obviously this leads to a very low prosecution rate as well. It's virtually impossible to prosecute anyone at the end of the day.
Very, very problem.
It wouldn't be feasible, A, and B, it would be very difficult to, from a financial perspective, it would make no sense. And it would be very difficult to go and litigate in a foreign jurisdiction and convince the authorities there to proceed against people that are largely faceless.
It's difficult. The jurisdictions is always a problem for us to get cooperation. Other contributory factor is the last situation that we've been involved. The hackers executed some 800 different scripts. So after they gain access to the environment with a legitimate user account, and there's nothing that your security can do to block it. If you don't keep them outside from the very start, as soon as they've got legitimate credentials to log in, all your security is null and void. So we saw that they executed some 800 different scripts, and they switch off all your antivirus, they switch off your logging, they switch off everything. You don't know that none of this is on anymore. You think you still have firewalls, you still have your security, but none of that is actually more in place. So they clean up, making it very difficult for us to trace where they're coming from.
And you know, from an accountability perspective, as you alluded to, with the information regulator and having to report incidents of this nature to them, it opens up South African firms, especially professional firms, to a lot of headaches because of the high level of confidentiality. Financial institutions, we're sitting with a situation, you know, there's already case law where not relating to ransomware specifically, but where attorneys' firms, for instance, had paid out money erroneously on the basis of phishing for ones that by cybercriminals, and they were held liable for those losses personally. So you know, I think that this is a quagmire and one which is going to affect more and more companies and institutions around the world, and obviously it's a nightmare for us here.
You know, cybersecurity, if it is not a headache for every business owner out there, or huge concern, you know, then they don't know what's actually happening in the country. It is a huge risk for organizations. We're seeing that our clients need to answer to, you might think, you know, that your data is not worth a lot, but if you've got data from banks or financial institutions, if you are breached, they will keep you busy for weeks answering in terms of what happened, how did that access, you know, what failed, who's responsible, and the lawsuits are really going to start piling up now that Poppy is also in play. You know, they are going to keep managers and business owners and directors liable. I'm foreseeing that we are entering you know, just a total new environment as business owners in South Africa with the Poppy Act and the breaches that we're seeing in South Africa taking place. It's a minefield out there.
Yeah, I think Poppy in itself, you know, and the GDPR regulations in the UK, for instance, these kind of headaches. There've already been major breaches of large law firms, for instance, in the UK, which the mind boggles. As an attorney myself, I could think of nothing worse than having my clients' information breached. It's something I think that and the same with auditing firms. It's an absolute nightmare.
What we're seeing is that the concept that they call big game hunting is one of the most popular types of attacks currently. So they identify industry, or they identify a company, and they go for that company. And as you've mentioned, law firms, about 15% of the attacks is against law firms. What they target is they target organizations where they know that you hold confidential information, that you hold financial information, that you are responsible towards other parties. Because if it's just your little small business, if you are an electrician, you know, and they come and steal your data, you can take the knock. So they're looking for institutions and organizations where you've got a responsibility towards others. Medical information, financial information, insurance firms. What they also like targeting with the business email compromises are estate agents, because they're dealing with trust money. Law firms are dealing with trust money. And if they can defraud you to pay the investments, all those type of things, if they can convince you to pay the money into the wrong account, very, very successful.
And Tommy, Danny, obviously, yeah, we have quite a few different pieces of legislation in this country that are applicable. You know, we've got the Intimidation Act, which makes this completely unlawful because you're forcing or inducing someone to behave in a manner which they normally wouldn't have, and they suffer harm as a result. The new cybercrimes bill, similar provisions are contained in that. and with RICA as well, the interception of data or other digital media with an intent of causing harm is similarly illegal. And then the difficulty, I agree with you, is POPIA. At the end of the day, that is opening us as business owners or as institutions up to a whole range of different offences that we potentially guilty of, even though we could have put a whole bunch of measures in place to safeguard information. And I think it's got to be a very holistic approach towards protecting organizations. And they talk about cyber hygiene, and perhaps you can expand on that and the kind of steps that organizations should implement to make sure that they're less vulnerable to these kind of attacks.
John, I think you touch on a really, really important aspect. The legal implications of cybercrime is really important for organizations to consider. We're sitting with a situation where organizations are going to become double victims. Number one, you're going to be hacked, and number two, then you're going to be prosecuted because you were hacked. And I think that's the dangerous part. And we're sitting with a situation where do you report it or don't you? You have an obligation to report it now. We can't hide it. With the social media going on, we're seeing that it leaks so quickly. It's not something that you can keep quiet anymore. If you don't have your policies, your procedures, your contracts with your service providers, your suppliers, your personnel, your clients, if all of that is not legally correct and in place, if this happens to you, they're going to close you down as a business. It is really, really important, the legal aspects, that people consider this. My point of view is to say to a client, don't consider if this happens to you. Consider when it happens to you, what will you do? So that's the main, your departure point. Nobody is safe in South Africa. We've got hacks against Standard Bank, Absa Bank, listed companies. How can a small organization then say, I'll never be hacked? It happens to everybody. There's literally, no safeguard where you can say, I've spent 10 million Rand on my security, I'm now safe. Because it's one user that clicks on the wrong thing and you're vulnerable. What do we see the main type of entry points or causes of the entry points is the following thing. So poor password control. We see that people are using the same password all over the show. There's sites on the internet where you can go and buy breached passwords, etc. And we see that people don't change their passwords for 2 years. Also, a company might say, you have to have 8 characters and it must be uppercase, lowercase, special characters. So a lot of people go and they say P, @ dollar sign, W, 0RD for password. The hackers knows that. They've got libraries where they replace all the A's in words with an A, with an @, all the S's with dollar signs. We run 27,000 password attempts, brute force attacks per second. So I can literally break your password. If you go onto a Kaspersky site, if you use password as I've spelled it, it takes less than 1 second to break it. So password control is really, really important. What we've seen is that words like Afrikaans words or sentences or African languages are more difficult to break. Well, you never use English language for passwords in any case, but you use a string, something that doesn't make sense. Then we've got people don't have offline backups. They don't test their backups. They have outdated software. That's one of the biggest causes because the service providers are not supporting those softwares anymore. Patch management on your firewall. People buy the cheapest antivirus because they don't want to spend. That antivirus, you get what you pay for. They don't have endpoint monitoring, so if there's alerts going off, nobody looks at it. Two-factor authentication on your email account is something that you cannot do without. If you've got a Gmail account, Office 365, any online mail accounts must have two-factor authentication on it. So those are some of the simple things. I have undertaken to give you a list of all the things that I know you guys are going to send out to all the participants afterwards. So have a look at all those minimum things that you can look at. It's cheap stuff, but take it to your IT department and ask them, have we got this in place? Have we got this in place? Because cyber security is something where a manager needs to rely on his IT people. It's a deep, dark hole. You can't check it for yourself necessarily. We don't have the knowledge necessarily to check it. So go through that list, check if everything is in place. And those are the basic things.
And I think obviously remote working has added to the complications around ransomware attacks. It's everyone's got devices that are scattered all over the show within their organizations. There's very little control. Third parties can easily access those devices, and this is opening up a whole new host of attacks.
Yeah. We've seen that. So number one, companies allowed their personnel to take, we had a crisis situation. So take your computer, go work from home. Nobody changed their policies and procedures. So number one, your employment contract says you're allowed to investigate a person's computer, see where he's taken some of your data. But now we've got a person working from home. Your policy and procedure doesn't cover his private computer from home necessarily. All of a sudden we had to open up to say, oh, you need access to the server. Let's put everything on OneDrive, or let's put it on Dropbox. Is that covered? Can you claw it back? People are using their own private email account, their own private Dropboxes, etc. And it's company data lying in there. So that's the first thing. Secondly, now everybody went working from home. They've got routers at home. That 90% of the routers at homes still has the default password on it. So I can literally log into your router with the admin and password, and I can see what you're doing. So there's no gearing up of the security, much lower security at homes. People are also tending to use their private computers, and the kids are using that same computers for gaming, for schoolwork, all of that. So yes, we've seen that with the pandemic and working from home. There was a huge influx of attacks because of this extra vulnerability that was opened up.
And something else that I think, measures that should be considered by organizations is that it's really worth looking into specialized insurance. There are a variety of new offerings on the market in this regard, and I think it's becoming essential due to the extent of the damage that you can suffer. It can run into tens or hundreds of millions in certain cases. If you look at Transnet, for instance, I think another thing that definitely needs to be done, as you alluded to earlier, is we have to really relook anything from standard terms and conditions, employment agreements, any other agreements with third parties, because at the moment we simply don't make any provision for it. You've got a situation with Transnet at the moment that's relying on force majeure. With all due respect, I believe that's a completely misguided defense and approach. It has no basis in law. And at the end of the day, we could build specific provisions into agreements making reference to cyber attacks, and that there's no liability or limited liability if attacks like that take place. And it's also what business owners have to realize, and is that at the end of the day, there's a huge responsibility and an obligation to make sure that you have a procedure in place to protect yourself against these kind of attacks to the best of your ability, a policy, and it's properly implemented. Otherwise, you're going to be open up to a litany of different, whether it's criminal liability or civil liability.
True. We typically advise clients, your goal with cybersecurity is never to be 100% secure, because that doesn't exist. You have to get as close to that. So we say, first of all, you need to spend 50% of your budget in preventing it. Then you need to spend 30% of your budget detecting, is there a breach? Has somebody gotten past my security controls? And then the last portion is, if they get past all of that, how do I recover? And in recovery, you've got your backups, you've got your insurance, which forms a huge part of that. So the insurance is really not that expensive. We that deal with it, we see what the type of bills are or the costs are in terms of doing these type of things. So your cyber insurance typically covers you for incident response, getting a team like us out to come and help you. It helps you with your lawyers. It helps you with PR teams. It helps you with the ransom payment. It helps us to restructure your data if that's needed. So there's definitely a huge business case for paying ransom. So the other thing is that that clients should have a look at is having an incident response plan in place. Plan for this, exercise it. We do simulations with management teams, with IT teams to say, okay, if you are breached, what's the steps that you need to take? Because that critical first, how you act, how you handle it, that's what's important.
And I think training's got a lot to do with it as well. Your organization and everyone in it needs to be up to speed with what's happening out there, how serious the risk is, and what steps and measures should be taken to reduce the risk of ransomware attacks.
Yeah, no, definitely. User training, user awareness, some of the most important things to consider when you approach your cybersecurity.
And Danny, tell me, for argument's sake, you receive this bright red flashing notice on your screen that says, it's Revelware or whoever else it is that's now attacked your system, and we're demanding $5 million from you as a ransom. What would you recommend doing? Do you leave your computer on? Do you switch it off? Who do you contact? What would be the first steps in responding to an incident like that?
It's a very difficult situation to handle. Every situation is unique. Some of the ransomware, the majority of them, if you interrupt them, you can't decrypt them. So if you stop the process, it didn't finish necessarily, and you can't get that specific device back. But on the other side, we've had a lot better results where we stop or interrupt that process. So the first thing that we advise clients is to contact experts like us so that we can see what program is running, what are they utilizing. We've got quite a good database in terms of what's the best way to act with a different type of situation. Immediately disconnect that device from the network, disconnect the network from the internet. One of the steps is to go through a process of changing all your passwords in the environment. So there's a couple of very, very important steps to follow. But the first thing is get experts involved. Disconnect from the environment, stop it from spreading further, contain that damage, spreading further. So. And
so thank you so much, Danny. I've learned a lot myself in the last half an hour or so. Thank you for joining me on this call. And what I'd like to invite everyone who's watching, you're welcome to email Danny or myself, danny@cyanra.co.za or cdclaw@icloud.com, and we'll gladly answer any questions that you've got.
Excellent.
Danny, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated.
Charles, I really appreciate it.
We managed to share something with everyone out there.
100%. I hope it adds value to everybody that joined in. And thank you very much for your time and inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Danny. Have a great day.
Same to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.